I mean, it was survival and trying to help people. I remember when the National Guard finally came in, that was maybe day 5, and they started passing out MREs. Most of the people on Convention Center Boulevard were so weak they couldn't open them.
Just like Katrina, just like what happened in North Carolina and East Tennessee last year, just like what happened in Texas last week. You never know what's coming. You have to be prepared to go for whatever does show up.
More often than not, and it's one of the rewards of being in office, you see how many great people raise their hand and say, I want to help. And that'll actually, if you ask me about Knoxville and Katrina, that will be my lasting memory.
20 years after Katrina, and we are back in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. It's hard to believe, if you were walking down this street, to think that a natural disaster the size of Katrina would do so much devastation, because it has rebuilt back better.
And part of the reason that we're here is to show you the East Tennessee connections to the Gulf Coast and the people impacted most by Katrina. One of them is the police chief in Knoxville, who was a young lieutenant in New Orleans when Katrina hit.
Just take us back, Chief, to your name, rank, and serial number when you were in New Orleans in 2005. What were you doing?
Sure. So in 2005, I was a pretty new police lieutenant assigned to the 8th District, which is in the French Quarter. I think the second largest police district in the New Orleans Police Department. I was the second in command of that area at the time.
And what do you remember in the days before Katrina? What were you hearing?
So, one of the things that, I tell a lot of people is, Katrina for us, like, we knew it was going to be bad, but we had been through so many hurricanes before. I grew up with hurricanes as a kid. I grew up having my parents tell me about Hurricane Camille and Hurricane Betsy, and those things just seemed like stories to me. And, I had lived as a police officer, I've lived through many hurricane deployments and seen a lot of bad weather, that, a lot of damage, but nothing like Katrina. So we knew it was going to be bad, but we were obviously not expecting, what occurred.
When you hear Hurricane Katrina, what comes immediately to your mind?
I'll be honest with you, John, I've not talked about it a whole lot. I just actually did a presentation for the first time in Washington, D.C. on my involvement in Katrina. But, what I think of is just the misery, right? When you think of bad events that occurred in our country, bad things have happened, but people involved still had some semblance of their life left. During Hurricane Katrina, not only did people lose everything that they owned, but their job was gone. That was the first week of school. School was just starting. Schools were gone. So imagine being a New Orleans police officer and your spouse, you have no idea where your spouse is, no idea where your kids are, and then finally you get a call from them, and they're in San Diego, California, and the kids are enrolled in school in California, and job does not exist anymore, the school doesn't exist anymore. It's just the level of destruction, the level of life-altering events is just, I can't even fathom it.
What was the most heartbreaking thing for you, Chief?
For me, from what I remember is, it's so many, to boil it down to one thing, I don't think I could do that, but, in some of the assisted living, like apartment complexes, there were people who were really, really bad shape. And I remember we went up into some of those buildings and we had to break the windows out because the windows wouldn't open. So we broke the windows out to get some air in. And, we had officers that were carrying up bags of ice when we were able to get some ice to, try to keep those people cool. We had, 2 police officers kill themselves. We had, when people, there's obviously a lot of dead bodies, there's nowhere to put them, there's no morgue. So we were stacking up bodies on the flood wall by the riverfront. Just the ability not to be able to control anything. The sheer misery from when you sweat, your body makes salt. So your clothes felt like the outside of your clothes had like a layer of salt crust on it. And, there's no way to wash clothes, no way to, it was just a sheer level of constant misery. Sleeping at night, in a cool 88 degrees, it never ended. And that's the difference, I think, with some other, big events you go through, is you get to go home at the end of the night. Well, you get to go see your family. That was gone. There was no communication.
Misery, sheer misery,
Yes.
for days and weeks.
Weeks. Ice. There was no ice. You take for granted. I love ice. Still to this day. If I drink a Coke, the ice is all the way up to the top, or an iced tea. It's full of ice, and just not having that was really, really tough.
Did you feel abandoned as a local first responder because so much help was outside the city?
Well, not really, John, because we didn't know what was going on.
Right.
My world was what was literally right in front of me, was my world, right? So when I got that first newspaper, I think it was the first time I thought of anything else other than the French Quarter. And that's just, that is literally I can't put it any other way. It was the first time that I thought that there was a world outside of what was, everything else had to be blocked out.
The first run of the Times-Picayune was the first.
Yes, and that wasn't printed in New Orleans because the Times-Picayune was flooded out. They printed that somewhere else, and even had a sports page in it, if I remember correctly. But you just had no idea of anything else going on in the world.
You saw the worst in people and you saw the best in people.
Yes.
Are there memories of either that really stand out?
There is, there was, I remember by the convention center, and it's one of those things I can still picture in my mind's eye. There was an old lady that we were taking care of, and she'd expired, and she was sitting in a lawn chair, and we covered her up with a sheet. And there was a national news reporter that was there. I won't mention the affiliate, but kept trying to get a picture, taking a picture of her. We would not let them lift that. I just thought that was so low class, right? That lady had died with no dignity at all. But for the most part, New Orleanians, Louisiana people, we take care of one another. If you come to a person from Louisiana's house, we will feed you. And it's almost an insult if you don't eat. And people, anyone that had anything, they took care of people. They really did. People in the French Quarter where I was really, took care of one another. I remember the restaurants, power was gone. They opened up their freezers to us. They were calling up people at headphones and said, go into my restaurant and get everything out the freezer and cook it because it's going to go bad. Mm-hmm. And, so, they gave us everything they had.
Anything else, Chief, that you would like to share about that experience or what you shared at your presentation? Why did it take so many years for you to talk about it?
It's tough. It really, I've been through many things in my professional career, but I can't think of anything that weaved in so personally, than Katrina. And it's just not something that I was ever really interested in reliving. Reliving, right? What I tell people about Katrina is that it was something I'm so glad I went through because it really molded me into part of who I am. But I really hope I never have to do, anything like that again. And one of the things that I've carried with me and I've carried with me here is I'm driven for emergency preparedness. The first snowstorm we had here when we were preparing for it, I think I drove everybody in the police department crazy because, I wanted to know, were we ready? Were we ready for anything? And I still take that with me, as long as I'm in this job, I will bring that with me, right? We need to make sure we're ready. We need to make sure that we've thought of everything, not only, for our officers, employees, but for the whole community, that we're able to respond. So it's something that, that I take with me, but also, in this day, and you see it a lot being in the news business, a lot of times you see the worst in people. And in this business, in my business, we see the worst in people. But in true natural disasters, I think in a lot of ways, it brings out the best in people because people will always, I think, work to take care of one another.
So the mindset is just, I've got to help who I can help right now or
Yes.
fill my role right now.
Absolutely. It was survival and trying to help people. I remember when the National Guard finally came in, that was maybe day 5, and they start passing out MREs. Most of the people on Convention Center Boulevard were so weak they couldn't open them, and we had to help them open the MRE. The plastic was too thick. That's
These
how weak they were.
evacuees.
Yeah, so we were helping people opening the MRE packet and then the meal on the inside because they were so weak they couldn't open it. You know, I mean, you know, sit outside in the heat just for a day with no water, you know, in 98-degree heat with the sun baking down you, 100% humidity, it'll sap the life out of anybody. But picture being older, you know, picture not knowing what the future was, or just how you were going to get safety. I mean, the bare comforts in life, you know, food, water, shelter, gone, non-existent.
So many memorable moments in that interview, Robin, but one that stood out was when the chief said he does not look at ice the same way, fills his cup every time. It was such a luxury in the days, weeks, and months after Katrina.
Never enough ice. Well, coming up, we will hear from another official from Knox County, former Knox County Sheriff Tim Hutchison. In the hours after Katrina, he was tasked with taking his helicopter and plucking people off roofs that were surrounded by water.
We're back in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, along the Gulf Coast. We're only about an hour or so from the city of New Orleans. When you think about Katrina, it was the wind and the water that did so much damage.
But in New Orleans, it was the levees. They gave way, submerging that city. 80% of the city covered in water. In the hours after, Knox County Sheriff Tim Hutchison got a call to get in his helicopter, come down to New Orleans, and rescue people on top of their houses.
20 years ago, almost, something unimaginable happened. But here in 2025, do you have flashbacks to what happened when everyone was watching what was playing out in New Orleans and Mississippi and the Gulf Coast? Katrina?
Well, yeah, it was a long time ago for Katrina, but yes, not when I first received a call, there was no video. There was no footage because the storm had just gone through, and it was supposed to come ashore as a 3, Category 3. It built overnight, came ashore as a Category 5, and so I got to the office that morning and I got a phone call from Sheriff Harry Lee of Jefferson Parish, which is half of what you see New Orleans. Half of it is actually Jefferson Parish, half of it's Orleans Parish. And I got a phone call from him, and I knew Harry and had met him with some Sheriff's Association, National Sheriff's Association stuff. And I knew Harry, and Harry goes, Tim, I need helicopters. He said, we're underwater. I said, did it come in, did it do much damage? He said, well, I don't know about the damage, but he said everything's flooded down here. He said everything but the French Quarter. It's a high ground. When the French came in, they settled on high ground. And he said, but everything else is flooded down here. And he said, I need helicopters. There's people on roofs everywhere. And so we immediately loaded up 3 helicopters and proceeded to get there.
And you get there, and what do you see?
Well, prior to getting there, we see Mississippi. Nobody said anything about Mississippi, and there hadn't been any footage. We did get to see some footage when we were in Mobile refueling. We were watching, and Fox News had got a helicopter up finally, and we were looking at it. And so we sort of knew what we were getting into on the way there, but we had no idea Mississippi was flattened and houses were gone. It's just subdivisions with driveways and no houses sitting there. And it washed all that about a mile or so inland. And so then we get, as we approach New Orleans Parish, we're flying across like Pontchartrain. And we look ahead, and all we can see is some glitter off of the water. We couldn't see any buildings unless they were really tall. And it was just water. And then we get there, and a lot of the houses were completely submerged, and some of them had maybe 3 or 4 feet out of the water. And there's people sitting on top of these houses. everywhere.
You look back at what happened, and now you fast forward 20 years. Does it seem real, what you experienced then as you look back? Or is that just part of being what you are, and that was in the world of emergency management? You just kind of get into overdrive and go.
Well, yeah, certainly I remember it. I remember it was, as it is today, looking back, I would think, gosh, that was stressful, but it wasn't. I was trained for it. I was ready to move and do that, and so we did it. Everybody did it. I wasn't alone. I had a lot of employees with us, and we went down as a crew together, and everybody worked hard. It was awful conditions for us. We got there. We had to stay in a hangar that had half the roof ripped off, and there was no electricity. So we're sleeping. It's 82, 83 degrees at night and 100 in the day, but we couldn't fly at night. There were no lights. Nothing was on. It just dark, and so we wouldn't fly. None of the helicopters would fly at night. But we'd be up first light. We'd fuel on the way back and bunk down for the night, and then we're up first light the next morning going again.
What did you eat? Because fast food restaurants aren't open, are they?
No. Well, for the first few days, we just crackers and stuff, and I actually sent someone to Sam's Wholesale and buy a bunch of crackers and things to take and some drinks, and it's a good thing because that's the only thing we had. FEMA didn't get there for 3 days, and then there was some kind of a little meal, and. But I've got a picture that I can forward you of FEMA parked on Interstate 10, but not coming in yet.
We're coming. When you look back over your long career, where does Katrina fall in it of situations that stand out?
Well, Katrina is one of those that stands out in the top few. It's something you don't really see much of. I had been to one hurricane flood in North Carolina prior to that, but it wasn't of this magnitude. This wasn't just an area, this was a whole city, and people just trapped everywhere. And there wasn't that many rescue boats to go get people, and it was just unbelievable how large in scale of a magnitude it was.
And when you watch the news now, like we're watching right now, what's playing out in Texas, what played out last September in eastern Kentucky, northwest Tennessee,
of North Carolina and Tennessee.
Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, and then so many other things in between. The people who we all look to are first responders. They are key in all of this, aren't they? When tragedy strikes, it's important to have people who are ready to respond on the dime, right?
Well, that's one of the most important things that government can do, and that is prepare first responders. Give them the equipment that they need, and give them the training that they need, and have them ready to go, because just like Katrina, just like what happened in North Carolina and East Tennessee last year, just like what happened in Texas last week, you never know what's coming. You have to be prepared to go for whatever does show up. And the communities that don't do that, it's a shame that they don't think far enough ahead that we could have real problems one day.
Yeah. And there are lessons learned, from Katrina, from these tragedies that are happening. Are there lessons that need to be learned to prepare for the next one?
There are lessons learned there in every one of these, and for instance, with Katrina, FEMA wasn't prepared for a large event like that, and so it took them about 3 days to get together and get things together and arrive down there and take care of something that's that large. And so they've learned from that, you know, and they've been pretty good since then to get on the spot. But yeah, any of these, you learn from every one of them.
Sheriff Hutchison says of the many emergencies he responded to during his long career, he says Katrina certainly is one of the most memorable.
And a lot of people in East Tennessee say this was one of the most memorable storms they can remember. That includes former mayor of Knoxville, Bill Haslam. He was the mayor at the time, welcoming evacuees from the area we're standing on in the Gulf Coast to the city of Knoxville and in East Tennessee. More from him right after this.
After Katrina hit, many people decided they would stay here and rebuild, but many more decided they would evacuate. And it so happens that hundreds ended up 600 miles away.
In Knoxville, and one of the people in charge of welcoming them to our community was then Mayor Bill Haslam.
When you hear Katrina, what comes to your mind?
You know, obviously the horror of the whole event, but then also us being, you know, FEMA calling saying, you know, at first like, oh, we got 5,000 people. No, we got 10,000, kind of almost the blur of war, the haze of war, if you will. But also the way Knoxville responded. It was incredibly impressive to me, and to this day I'm grateful for a lot of people that stepped up.
600 miles away, yet they quickly became our neighbors. Explain the significance of where we're standing.
So FEMA really didn't know how many people that were going to come, so they said be prepared for this much. So we got prepared, and we thought, okay, we can use the Civic Coliseum, but then we also asked churches and places around town to raise their hand, and scores of them did. And you know, people talked a lot about some of the racial disparity that the storm brought up, which inevitably was true. But I'll say this for this area. We had very white suburban churches saying, here, send us people and we'll help take care of them. And, you know, despite all the problem you saw, you also saw a whole lot of people saying, we want to help, tell us how.
It's from the people that I've talked to, it was the worst in Mother Nature and in some cases the best in humanity.
It truly was. And so you had, when we said, you know, we got a lot of people coming, how, you know, who can help us? Like Mayor Ragsdale, who was the county mayor at the time, and we were just swamped by people who said, we want to help. Now, our problem was a little bit like, hold on a second, we got to get organized here. And that's a good problem to have.
So when the evacuees first started showing up, how did that process go?
Well, it's different. So they came in, and again, the hard part was, and I don't blame them, but FEMA just really couldn't give us a schedule and say, here's who's coming and when, et cetera. So they kind of came in bursts and trickles, and they would typically fly into the airport, and then we would set them, usually I would go on the airplane, the commander of the air base would go in, I'd say, hey, welcome to Knoxville. The commander would explain how the process is going. We had buses set up to bring folks here, or to some different churches that were around town as well. We were trying to not, you know, flood the zone, if you want that analogy in this case, but not overwhelm anyone.
But these are people who are coming with really nothing, maybe what they have in their hands.
You know, one of my main impressions, I have a daughter who was going to off for a freshman year of college, and we had just taken her to college. So you're surrounded by all these people, full of hope, life opening up, big opportunities, to people who had lost everything. Everything they had was in a garbage bag, and you know, they're holding kids and sometimes, some cases pets, but everything they had was with them, and they had no idea what was going to happen to what they left behind.
How long did most of them stay here?
You know, it was very. One of the things that made it easier for us was a lot of people actually did have contacts and family somewhere else, and so as they got stabilized and they could get in touch with family, you know, sooner than I expected, people started, you know, filtering their way out. And we had ways, you know, they had some money that FEMA gave them, and we had some ways to help them make calls and connections, and then to help them make the transportation connections to go other places. So we didn't have as many people for as long as we thought, mainly because, again, once they got stable, they wanted to go where there was family or connections.
And for about how long did this setup last? Do you remember?
You know, I don't remember.
Okay.
A couple or 3 months is my memory, but okay. I could be off there.
No problem. You mentioned you have just a couple of stories that really stand out.
I mean, one is how many people raise their hand to help. That'll be my lasting memory. A couple of humorous ones. So these folks are all flying into the airport, and all different kinds of aircraft that the government was chartering. And the last one that came in was a Delta charter. And these are the folks who remember at the end they're having to make people leave New Orleans. And these are the people who came basically under duress, you've got to leave. And so it's like someone scooped all the nightlife of New Orleans, picture that in all its color, and put them on a plane and send them to Knoxville. Well, they didn't tell people where they were. So if you said, I want to go to Dayton, Ohio, you go, okay, you're going to Dayton, Ohio, and I want to go to West Palm, Florida. They just shoved them all on the airplane and told them they were going wherever they thought they were going. So I get up on this is the last one, I get up on the plane with the commander of the airbase and say, welcome to Knoxville. Well, the plane goes crazy. Knoxville, blank, 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 I can't, they told me I was going to wherever. And it's a carnival in there. There's a guy with a snake wrapped around his neck. There's an air marshal on the plane, but he's cowering in the corner. The flight attendants have given up. There's pets everywhere. And so we finally get people off, and there's this one woman who's just the loudest person on the plane.
Okay.
And so remember, we're bringing everybody here, and she gets off and she has 7 dogs with her. And so she's just, everything's wrong, and she screamed about everything. She said, I'm supposed to be in West Palm, Florida. And finally I went over to her, I said, why West Palm? She goes, my sister lives there. I go, do you promise me you have a sister? She goes, I do. I said, so there was a Delta agent, we're at the Air Guard base there. I went to the Delta agent, I said, would you find the next flight to West Palm? And I gave her my credit card and said, this lady would like to go there. And I thought it'd be worth it. And so the Delta woman comes back and says, I got good news. I can get an emergency fare for only $99. I go, that's terrific. And she goes, plus $100 a dog.
The most expensive flight to West Palm.
But it might have been worth it. And then a friend called me, this is 5 years later, somebody said, I just read about you in a book. And I go, what's that? And he said, he was reading a book about Katrina, and this guy who had been a survivor, been an evacuee, had come here, and he'd written a book about the experience. And he describes, he says, I'm thinking this is you. He said, we land in Knoxville, Tennessee, and this white dude gets on, smiling like a game show host, and starts to tell us what's going to happen with the rest of our life. And I thought, not such a great description.
Oh my gosh, those are awesome memories. Well, anything else that I haven't asked you think is important to point out about it?
No, listen, it's like you said, the worst events bring out both sometimes, in this case, the worst in Mother Nature, but also sometimes the worst in human nature as well. But more often than not, it's one of the rewards of being in office, you see how many great people raise their hand and say, I want to help. And that'll actually, if you ask me about Knoxville and Katrina, that will be my lasting memory.
Robin, like Sheriff Tim Hutchison, Bill Haslam said he's handled a lot of emergencies as a mayor, as a governor. Katrina really stands out about the way people reacted in East Tennessee to open their arms up and say, what can we do for you right now?
It truly is the volunteer spirit. And if certainly this is just one of many visits that we have made back here to Bay St. Louis. And if I'm going over the courses of those visits, what is the memory that stands out to me? And I think it has to be that first visit just days after the storm hit, being right here in this area, which was utter devastation. I remember that, but I like to look now around me, and this is the next memory I have of just how this town has built back beautifully.
It is really an extraordinary story, and it's been a privilege for us to cover it over the last 2 decades for you, our viewers in East Tennessee and really across the country. We appreciate you tuning in tonight and hope you see more of our digital coverage coming up on WBIR.com.